is being undertaken virtually. The decisions are valid as though it were at City Hall, and the meeting will be available to watch via the Council's YouTube channel. Item 1 on our agenda is apologies. I've received apologies from Councillor Ryan, and he will be replaced by Councillor Driver today. Councillor Sands is being subbed by Councillor Sands, and Councillor Fulton McAllister has sent his apologies due to work commitment. We have no public questions or petitions. Are there any declarations of interest from members on any of the items on the agenda today? Okay, thank you. Can members please indicate if they're happy for me to sign the minutes as being a true record of the last meeting? Got hands up there, so thank you for that. So we're on to item 5 now. I wonder if I could invite Councillor Mccartney Gray to give an update on the work of the Norfolk Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I apologise for this being a verbal update, and the meeting, which was held on the 8th of October, covered the ambulance response and turnaround times, focusing mainly in North Norfolk. It also covered the CQC release about bullying within the organisation, in which a statement was read out by East at that time. We've asked them to come back in 6 months' time with reporting on an update of what's been done to address the CQC concerns about East, a progress report on the measures being put in place to improve the emergency response to patients with mental health requirement, including data on the effect of those measures, and an explanation as to why past concerns about the service for patients with mental health emergencies have persisted for so long, and what are the lessons learned. We also had a, I've skipped, yeah, ambulance response times, apologies. We then looked at our work stream forward work programme, which is 26th of November. We'll look at St James Practice in Kings Lynn, proposed relocation and consultation by the practice and Norfolk and Waveney CCG. March 2021, Queen Elizabeth Hospital Foundation Trust progress report, that was postponed. Local actions to address health and care workforce shortages across Norfolk and Waveney, and in approximately 6 months' time, the ambulance service, and in 9 months' time, cancer services. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that report, Councillor Mccartney Gray. Does any members have any questions that they wish to raise? Councillor Somesi.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Mccartney Gray, I think you said that there was a statement read out in relation to the publicity, saw in the newspaper about the bullying that goes on within the ambulance service. I mean, without wanting to go into too much detail, was it a long statement? Did it seem like a statement that to the committee that it sounded like they were trying to deal with this? Because this is something that's been in the media quite a lot and it's gone on for quite some time. What was your sense of that, if I may ask?
My sense is that with the new with the new people that have been drafted in, that it will be taken seriously and that they will actually deal with it. And I think with NHOSC asking them to come back, it's given them a time limit so that they can actually get moving on it quite quickly.
Thank you for that. Any other members with any questions on this? No, I can't see any hands up. Oh, yes, Councillor Sands, please.
More of a comment rather than a question, if that's okay. Up until the end of the last university academic year, we had a group of paramedic science students living next door to us. And I'd just like to commend those students and any others enrolled in UA's paramedic science course, which of course trains people for the ambulances, because they were doing 12-hour shifts of unpaid work placements. And I tell you now, they were absolutely brilliant. They worked their butts off. So I'd just like that to be noted, that our paramedic science students are brilliant.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sands, for that very important point. Councillor Giles.
I was just going to say the Community Safety Partnership Scrutiny panel hasn't met yet, but there have been potential dates circulated which I've responded to. So hopefully there'll have been a meeting by the time of our next scrutiny meeting, and I'll provide a written report and answer any questions.
Thanks very much for that. And presumably if any members of this committee have any things they think are relevant for community safety, they can get in contact with Councillor Giles ahead of any meeting, and he might be
feel free to email me.
Great, thank you very much. So we'll now move on to item 6, which is the Scrutiny Committee Work Programme. That is on page 27. I'll begin by giving a brief update on the item, one of the items we considered at our last meeting, and that was the Select Committee work undertaken on short-term lets. That was considered by Cabinet yesterday evening, and although Councillor Waters was very positive about the work, Cabinet feels at this stage it's not possible to take that further forward. I have written to, as requested, to both Clive Lewis and Chloe Smith, asking for their views on the report, and also asking Clive Lewis to join the APPG. I've asked them both to feed back to this committee, or to feed back to me, so that I can feed back to the committee at our meeting on the 19th of November. Does anyone have any comments they want to make on that at this stage? No, thank you. Well, the next thing, Councillor Carlo.
Yeah, thank you.
Denise, you're muted at the moment.
Okay, is that okay? Yeah. What's the council reasoning to do with lack of resources within the city council, please? In particular, the planning department.
So the I won't attempt to do full justice to Councillor Waters' detailed response, but in essence, I think if I can say, it was resource, particularly looking at the strain on the council as we work through the current pandemic that we have going on. But I think by the time we next meet, the minutes for that meeting will be available, which will give a better synopsis than I can. Or you can look at it on YouTube, of course, as well.
Thank you.
So the next item on the work programme is to discuss our next select committee, scope and membership. So in the report on page 28, paragraph 9, we've got some members who've agreed to put their names forward to be on the the group that will look at ASB fly tipping and city council processes. I've also had a request to suggest that maybe that committee could also look at safe drug consumption rooms, but I know that Councillor Osborne is indicating and has something he'd like to say on that, please. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think that all of those topics are in themselves quite big and important topics: fly tipping, antisocial behaviour, and drug-related antisocial behaviour in particular. And my experience of scrutiny, sitting on the antisocial behaviour and fly tipping task and finish group last year, which actually didn't actually achieve anything, is that it needs to be very focused. And I think that fly tipping is a sort of focused and discrete topic in itself, where you can come up with identify particular problems and some discrete solutions. The drug safer consumption rooms, I think, is obviously clearly a very important topic. But in the discussion that we've had, I understand that there might not be capacity within the city council to deal with that, to do it sort of full justice, especially as council officers are overworked, to say the least, and that therefore it may be worth recommending that to the Norfolk Health Overview Scrutiny Committee, who actually have more power to deal with it than the City Council.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Mccartney-Gray.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to take forward the work to end HOSC on drug consumption rooms. But the other topics where we're looking at select committees at this time, I wondered actually if there was capacity within both the council and ourselves, and especially our officers at this time, to take those forward. And I would propose that we don't at this time.
Okay, I've got Councillor Giles and Councillor Osborne. So Councillor Giles first, then Councillor Osborne, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to second what Councillor Mccartney-Gray has said. While these are crucial topics, I do feel at this moment in time that our officers are under a huge amount of pressure. Obviously, things are going very badly nationally. Many areas of the country going back into lockdown. I think there's going to be huge demands on officers to both fulfil their ordinary functions within their service areas and help out in others over the coming months. I think we're going to have a tough winter. And for this reason, I think we should defer having task and finish groups at this moment in time over the winter, given the circumstances we're in. That's not to undermine the significance of any of the issues that could be raised in them. But obviously we agreed a work programme for this, for the main committee meetings last summer, and we've slimmed that down in response to the demands on our officers. And I think if we're going to prioritise areas to scrutinise, it should be those that got the most votes at our work programme setting meeting last summer. Thank you.
Councillor Osborne, and then I think I saw Councillor Graham indicate as well.
Thanks. Yes, well, I'm quite surprised actually to hear that suggestion, because fly tipping was along with short-term lets last year, was the only topic that was directly suggested by a resident to this committee, rather than being sort of discussed at the work programme. And you know, I know that clearly it's a very important topic to people. You know, when I speak to people on the doorstep, it comes up day after day after day after day, and it has got worse during lockdown. Reports of fly tipping, and this was already postponed and deferred from last year because you know, the meetings that were meant to take place around discussing fly tipping didn't happen, or information wasn't followed up on, which I was very disappointed about at the time. And I think this is, you know, we have a duty to residents that suggested this topic and requested it, that we follow up on it. And I think that there are already members who've said that they would be happy to take part in this task and finish group. I've already done quite a lot of research onto the topic, so I'm happy to sort of put that research forward. But I think it's really important that we keep that topic going. I think that it is worth separating out fly tipping from antisocial behaviour, which is such a huge topic. Whether there's capacity to deal with antisocial behaviour and fly tipping as two separate topics, I think is debatable. But I do think that the fly tipping issue is something that scrutiny can have a real impact on, and I would strongly recommend that we keep that.
But thank you. Before I bring in Councillors Graham and Sarmezi, who've both indicated, I mean, there's a couple of things I think that's worth taking on board. One of which is that select committees, task and finish groups, whatever you like to refer to them as, can be member driven. There doesn't have to be an officer time commitment on that. So, and they themselves aren't time limited. So you could have a situation where something is begun by members to get the work ongoing, and then gets picked up as and when we know the situation with officer availability. I also think that Councillor Osborne's suggestion of splitting fly tipping from antisocial behaviour is a very pragmatic one, I think, given the situation we're in at the moment, because it does reducing the scope does potentially reduce the workload as well. So I personally wouldn't want to see this removed entirely, but I do think having a task and finish group, a select committee which just looks at fly tipping is manageable, particularly if it's member led in the short term. But I've got Councillor Graham, Councillor Sarmezi, and then Councillor Mccartney-Gray. Thank you.
Thank you. Some valid points have been made about council capacity, but what that says to me is all the more reason to take up the offers that we've had from councillors and the interest from residents and use the research that's been done already. So I hope we'll go ahead and keep the focus as something manageable and councillor led. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sarmezi, please.
Yeah, I think I'd like to just pick up on something that Councillor Giles said, and I think we have got a very tough winter up ahead. And I think that depending on how things shake down, we're not quite sure what the demands are going to be on councillors either. So I'm sort of concerned about, having said that, I'd like to be involved. I mean, I have to say, since then we've had the second spike, and we're joining the rest of the country in terms of having a higher R rate and all the rest of it. So I just think we need to be mindful of the fact that it's not just the officers, that it's also, as ward councillors, we might have to be more actively involved in more COVID related type response to what's going on. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mccartney-Gray.
Thank you. Councillor Sarmezi covered most of my points. And what I wasn't saying, just to make it clear, I was saying about deferring. I wasn't saying about dropping it altogether.
Thank you for clarifying that. Councillor Osborne.
I think Councillor Oliver was raised her hand first, actually.
Sorry, Councillor Oliver, I hadn't seen your hand there.
Yeah, sorry, that was very quick hand raise. Councillor Mccartney-Gray basically said what I was going to say, which is I don't want to lose the hard work that's already been undertaken, but I don't want to put pressure on officer time. So deferment would be my option, I think, at the moment. But yeah, just to recognise that it is a really important topic. I just wonder if we're all going to be, at home again, and we won't even get the chance to do our usual ward walks and report in fly tipping. Hopefully it won't come to that, but who knows? Thank you.
Councillor Osborne.
I take what's said about strain on people's time and so on, but I do think this topic was already deferred from last year, and I think we, as I said before, that we owe it to the residents to actually take this work forward. So I'd suggest that those people who are willing to take it forward, myself included, myself as an example, can take it forward, and if members feel that that they're being overwhelmed with other work, then maybe they can step back. I don't know what the constitutional sort of possibilities for doing that is.
Well, it's always
also,
possible. It's always possible to pause a select committee. So again, if circumstances change.
But I also think we can't just drop everything that the council is doing because of COVID. These are also issues that affect people's day-to-day life and have done for a long time. And that you could apply the same argument to other topics going forwards that are not directly COVID related. And I do also think that fly tipping increased during lockdown.
Thank you. Councillor Driver.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As just a member for today on scrutiny, I can understand where all councillors are coming from. I also believe that this should be put on the back burner for a little while. It's okay for councillors to say that certain councillors can carry on and to do the research and do the work. Now, if they're going to do the work and the research, they're going to get in touch with officers to find out what the figures are, what the research is, to find out what's going on. And unless Councillor Osborne has got some miracle cure that if he carries on and bring this back to the next meeting, that there'll be no fly tipping ever again, I believe that this could go on the back burner, because I think fly tipping will go on and on and on and on until we get a different government and to work out different ways that we can get rid of the fly tipping being put about. So I believe that you could put this on the back burner for a little while and come back in the spring.
Councillor Manning. Thank you. Then Councillor Sands, then Councillor Sarmezi, then Councillor Osborne, and then I'm going to take a vote on this. So
we shall never say anything.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and apologies if you hear my cat in the background. Yeah, I mean, for all the goodwill in the world, if we do find a group of councillors prepared to take it forward and report, there'll still be a time and administrative cost / commitment in bringing the report to scrutiny. And I do think that in present circumstances, it's lovely as it would be to have the group do its work. A luxury probably we can't afford. We're talking in terms of what's coming over winter. I mean, I'd be in favour not of kicking it into the very long grass, but at least into the mid-length grass and coming back to this in the new year. That would be my my view. Thank you.
thank you. I forget who I said was next now. I can't remember if it's Councillor Sands or Sarmezi, but Councillor Sands.
Thank you, Chair. Just speaking from experience, I've been involved in 2 major select committees. First one some years ago concerning community centres across Norwich, and the second one more recently, which still has the occasional meeting this was a county select committee on the preparation of a carers charter. Both, I might add, involved quite a degree of officer time, and both involved a large time commitment on behalf of committee members, not just councillors involved, but lay people who were seconded or sequestered to the committee as well. So while I agree that the whole question of fly tipping is extremely important, I think it would be better to put it on the back burner, to defer it for the time being, continue to report fly tipping and have it cleaned up wherever we can, and return to this when we know that officer time can be freed up without the current pressures that COVID applies, and we know that the second spike hasn't yet reached its peak and is going to involve a lot more officer time in City Hall. So yeah, regretful, but I do think we should defer this for the time being.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sarmezi, please.
Hi, yeah, thanks. And I would echo those sentiments that Councillor Sands just said. And I just like to remember what it was like when we were at Scrutiny panel, and we felt quite frustrated, I seem to recall, because due to the COVID and due to everybody, not just the officers, councillors as well, everybody's attention and focus was elsewhere, and there was a sense of frustration. And I recall I actually said at that meeting, look, we're in the middle of a pandemic, it can't be business as usual, and I would just like us to remember that. And I think we could find ourselves in the same position again in a few months' time, where because we've had to get and we almost certainly are, unfortunately, going to be have our attentions diverted into doing COVID-related things. So let's, as Councillor Sands says, wait until we really can have a good old run at it and come back to it probably in the new year, as Councillor Manning has suggested. Thank you.
Councillor Osborne and then Councillor Graham, please.
Thank you. Yes, well, I mean, I think the suggestions, as I said, it's been deferred already from last year. We've already separated it out from fly tipping and antisocial behaviour into just fly tipping, so to make it more manageable and more focused. Fly tipping itself is a sort of discrete topic that you can really run at. But I'm concerned that this deferring it to the new year would mean that when we get to the new year, this whole thing happens again, that it gets pushed on further back. And it's worth remembering that this the task and finish group is not due to report back until presumably the end of the civic year in March or April, or potentially even give it a whole year for this. So if members have time right now to push it forward, then we can start work on it. If suddenly if there is a second spike, which there looks like there is going to be, and everyone's time is completely taken up, then there can be a sort of deferral, or not a deferral period, but a time when people are thinking about other things and carry it on in the new year. But I don't think that we should just de facto defer it and then come again to this topic in the new year and find that we're going to defer it again. And as I say, I'm more than happy to carry on working on this, because it's a topic that gets raised every day for me, and we can't just drop everything that the council's doing because there looks like there's going to be a second spike. Obviously, we've got to prioritize, but we can't just drop everything that the council's doing. And this has been such a long ongoing issue that I think it's important to take it forward.
Chair, I'm going to propose a move to a vote on this.
Councillor Giles, as everyone else has spoken, I will just allow Councillor Graham to come in. She'll presumably only speak for a moment, and then we were going to go to a vote anyway. So, Councillor Graham.
Thank you. Someone referred to a miraculous cure, which we don't have, but we did vote on this because we thought we could make a difference on it, and that hasn't changed. What's in front of us, we don't know, but if we don't try, we won't succeed, and if we do try, we just might. So I hope we'll go ahead and support the offers that have been made so far. And if other councillors drop out, then I will seriously consider dropping in to support that effort.
Thank you. Well, we have a proposal that's been seconded to defer this item for a period unknown, and we'll take a vote on that. All members in favour of deferring, please indicate. Lucy, if you nod just so you've got the hands. Yeah. Any members against deferring, please indicate. Okay. Thank you. So that motion is carried, and we'll be deferring that item. So if we continue on the work programme, we now come to the gap in March. I think it would probably be a fair conclusion following the discussion we've just had that we don't wish to fill the March gap at the moment, in case of for pressures on officer time and for as we continue moving into further waves of the pandemic. Are members happy that we leave March empty for the time being and revisit that in the new year? Getting a number of nods, but Councillor Osborne, is that a thumbs up, or want to say something?
It is a thumbs up on that point. It was also a question about the December item. I don't know if you're still coming to that.
Yeah, well, no, good point. Yes, so December we're looking at the Equalities Information Report, which really is due for a slightly longer scrutiny this year. And I believe, Councillor Osborne, you have a suggestion you'd like to make in relation to another matter there.
Yes, so when we discussed at the work programme setting meeting, I can't remember whether it was in June or July, there was a topic proposed on social inclusion following COVID, and I think that topic could be. It was a very broad topic at the time, and sort of too much for too broad for a really effective scrutiny. But I think that elements of that topic could be drawn into the December work meeting and go alongside the equalities impact assessment, as I think they're related topics.
I'll second that.
Okay, do we have consensus on that? I mean, I don't know if I want to, someone like Adam maybe, do you wish to comment on whether that's looks practical?
Yeah, I mean, I think again it's going to come down to the exact scope of how much we look at, but yeah, I think we can probably do something around that. Depends how much depth we go into on the Equalities Information Report, how much additional detail we want to bring into that discussion, I suppose. But I'm happy to work with maybe one of the members just to sort of scope how we put that together. Would that be sensible?
Okay, well, we'll talk after the meeting and scope out that. So that's great. Councillor Somesi.
I'm sure this goes without saying, Chair, but I do hope that if things do become problematic and tricky, that we all accept that some flexibility and adapting may be up ahead, even for things that are agreed going forward in this meeting. I'm just really conscious that, you know, there might be tricky times up ahead, and I wanted to reiterate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and very valid point, and certainly something that's always at the forefront of my thinking. So, are people happy that we proceed on that basis, subject to changing as circumstances dictate? Yeah, lots of nods and thumbs up. So there's one final thing on the work programme before we move on to our substantive item, and that is in the November meeting, we're looking at rough sleeping, homelessness, potential for increases in Section 21 evictions, etc. I've spoken with Chris Hancock. We've worked out what that report's going to look like. Chris will be there, as will hopefully the portfolio holder. We also invited Matt Downey from Crisis and Caroline Allywell, who's formerly of Shelter and Systems Advice in a housing policy role. So again, with all of the caveats around changing circumstances, but that the work is largely done for that particular meeting. So we'll proceed on that basis for November. Councillor Osborne.
Yes, just to say that this is obviously a topic that I think a lot of people really care about and have experiences of as well that may be relevant. And I'd like to request that we invite public questions. Obviously, public questions are always welcome, but that we actually actively invite public questions on this topic.
Yeah. I'm happy to hear. Yeah, very happy to hear from members of the public, and we'll find an appropriate way of answering those questions within the Constitution, which can sometimes be slightly odd because of the procedural rules of the committee. I mean that questions come to me about the committee itself rather than about the item, but there's chair's discretion in the way that they're handled. So absolutely, would welcome questions from members of the public on that. So without any further ado, we'll move on to item 7, which is Norwich City Council's response to enhancing community development following COVID-19. I don't know if it should be following COVID-19 or in the midst of COVID-19 might be more accurate. But I'd like to welcome Kate Price, who'll be speaking to this report. I believe this is Kate's first appearance at Scrutiny, so very welcome, Kate. And you'll just set the scene, give us a quick synopsis of the report that you prepared for us, and then for members' reference on page 38, we've got some suggested recommendations that we could we're looking to put some flesh on by the end of the meeting. But over to you, Kate. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yes, excellent. So anyone who knows me knows brevity isn't my strong suit, so I've made some notes just to run through very briefly what the content of the report was. So it touches a little bit on our existing community development work. The council in general have really quite good links with the voluntary and community sector, and we regularly get a new stream of inquiries on pretty much a weekly basis from new organisations and residents wanting to understand how they get involved. However, obviously COVID presented a really interesting example of why that sort of development is so important. We certainly saw an awful lot of our existing groups sort of pivot the way they were doing things. We hugely saw the value of those communities that were more connected to each other, were far better able to support one another and cope than those that didn't have that. And we saw a lot of new development in things that are generally referred to as mutual aid groups or hyperlocal groups, who kind of came together around a shared sense of purpose, many of whom who've continued, I'd like to say, into recovery. I don't think we're in recovery, but they've continued nevertheless, despite going back to work after furlough. So the COVID recovery blueprint had a lot of elements in it around community working. We specifically put some elements in there around a focus on place-based working, which has been proven to be really effective, and asset-based community development models, which, for those of you who don't speak jargon, is about focusing on the assets and the good parts of an area and building on that, as opposed to going in with a deficit model, looking at what's wrong. And COVID really exacerbated the inequalities within areas. So we could absolutely map, and we could have told you probably before COVID that if this had happened, which areas would be worse affected. And through the RETA programme, obviously we have particular neighbourhoods we target more. When we overlaid our map of the reducing inequality target areas over the people who required support from us during COVID, it was nearly identical. So it really was very much about exacerbating what was already there. So then the blueprint is kind of about capturing all of that community element that's needed for recovery. So rather than take each one of the points that was given to us in that COVID recovery blueprint separately from a community perspective, what we've done is sort of combined them into what we've called our citizen participation blueprint, which is really about sort of underlining good practice, how we embed this, and why it's important in terms of a much wider picture. So the blueprint, as it stands, has 5 main themes within it. That is looking at our internal strengths and opportunities as a council on how we bring people more into service design and service delivery. Looking at really great practice from internal teams who've done really well in the past and what we can learn from their projects, but also from other councils, other organisations who aren't political, anyone who's got really good examples of how you bring people on a journey with you like that. How to understand how we actually invite people to be involved. A lot of the learning that we've done during COVID is quite interesting in the perception of the council and what people expect us to be asking them. So what we're trying to understand from people is how do we make that invite to them to come into the fold and stop them thinking that we don't want them when we do. There's a big part which is very much joined up with the equality stuff that you guys will be looking at later in the year about how we hear the unheard voices better and how we make sure we're not focused on those who shout the loudest, but are really encouraging those people who don't normally talk to us to have their views reflected. And then a section on kind of technological tools to kind of allow us to use that within projects, within development opportunities, to really give people creative and easy ways of inputting on service design or just a constant regular feedback loop with people. One of the things we're very clear within that blueprint is this sort of undertaking has to be council-wide because it can be so easily undermined. I'm sure all of you have had experience. You build that trust with residents, you build the trust with particular organisations, and that trust is very, very easily eroded if someone else within your own organisation isn't speaking the same language and isn't acting in the same way. We've got a kind of plan in terms of research for this, which I've laid out in much more depth in the document. And that's phase 1, is kind of researching those 5 topics, is really getting under the skin of what's going on now, how officers are feeling, what we could do differently, what we could do better. And then from all of that research, we want to create a set of kind of draft principles, which is, the idea of this is it's a really working, evolving, breathing document. It's not a strategy that we write and put on the shelf. It's a kind of reference guide for officers that, okay, you're thinking of redesigning your service. Here's some really good principles about how you engage the community, how you engage with people and ensure they feel part of that decision making. So we want to create a kind of draft set of principles and actions, which is kind of noted within the scrutiny recommendations, is we'd like to test out both with internal teams, but also with councillors, just to sense check what's gone on, what we've put into that, and look at perhaps areas where we could pilot an approach to see that that is the right course of action. And then we want to start making it real with teams. We've got different teams who are really receptive to the idea of the way they're designing services. Obviously, a lot of service redesign is happening at the moment, and how we're supporting people to do that, while continuing, my team aren't the only team that work with community groups and residents, but working with all of those frontline teams to look at how we really are embracing people into the council and appreciating the feedback that they can give us and collaborative working practices we have to have. So moving from seeing this as the council deliver services and they are just purely recipients of said service, we want to really have that culture where they're engaged in service delivery themselves. And in fact, in ideal situations, you don't provide a service at all because people are so well connected and so capable at a local level that they're doing a lot of that stuff alongside you, rather than just feeling like they're being done to. So we'll continue to work that up into a kind of breathing document, and then want to spend some time kind of embedding that with teams. And obviously, we won't stop with the normal, I guess, business as usual side as well, which is very much about supporting new groups as they come, having our networks that we work with them, giving them a voice into the council and making sure we can break any barriers down for them. So really the kind of, I guess, ask of Scrutiny Committee, if I refer back to the points that the Chair made, is how members can contribute to that blueprint, how they can feed in their ideas, how we look at the role of members within community development. Obviously, we started some work, I want to say about 2 years ago now, on what that role of the ward councillor is, because obviously you guys have so much contact with people that it's a brilliant source of really good quality information for people, and a kind of can often be the first stage in them understanding the council has something to offer them. And then suggestions and recommendations about the activity that's being developed, and then just sort of, I guess, any other recommendations you think we should be considering within this kind of revised and slightly more formalised way of working, just to help us embed that right across the council as an approach.
Great, thanks very much, Kate, for setting the scene there. We'll now move to a series of questions from members. Councillor Driver was first with his hand in the air, followed by Councillor Osborne. But if other members can indicate, I'll keep an eye on my screen and make a note. So,
yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Kate, for that. That was a very good report. I liked everything you said in that, and the way forward. Have you got a plan to say? I know you're doing some of this already, but you talk about getting involved with councillors and making a blueprint. Is there a timeline? I mean, you said you've been looking up this for the last 2 years, and I know it takes ages and ages and ages to come forward. How long are we looking for before you would recommend something to council for we to say this is the way forward and away we go? Is there a blue line, or is this ongoing forever?
So I think there's a couple of points in there. The role of the ward councillor was a slightly different piece of work. That we did some workshops with councillors around that topic back in the day when Adrian was still with us, so it's a little bit further ago. This is a separate piece of work that only just started as part of the blueprint recovery piece. So we've been working on it for about a month and a half now or so. Where we plan in terms, we're pushing ourselves quite hard, and as you've all sort of mentioned, there is a massive shortfall in capacity given COVID. But we're trying to prioritise this because it's a really important short-term window that we've got to almost make the best of a bad situation. So what we're hoping is by the beginning of next year, so in January, we'll have that draft set of blueprints to come back to specific groups of councillors, to come back to different teams with, to sense check, and then look to have something prepared to go to CLT and then Cabinet, probably in March kind of time. So we're trying to sort of speed it up as much as possible because we know it's a really important point right about now.
Great, thanks very much for that. Councillor Osborne, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got a couple of sort of few questions, and I've got some specific recommendations which I'll maybe come back to later. But first of all, sort of general question is about the sort of baseline data that we already have, because I know that Kate, your team's been working a lot, both pre and during the pandemic with community groups, as you mentioned, including on the reducing inequality target areas, and sort of you mentioned that those target areas have been a success, and I wonder what sort of baseline data we already have, and whether that can be shared with councillors as well, so that we can, which may help to help us to input into the strategy.
In terms of baseline data, I guess working from the reducing inequality work, that was a huge piece of data research. So The way that those were looked at was we looked at everything from responses to the local area survey, so the really kind of qualitative stuff that people are telling us about their area. We looked at everything to do with young people, crime, antisocial behaviour, like every bit of data that we could lay our hands on has been laid on. One of the things we do want to do, and we've not quite managed to progress yet as part of that in terms of the reducing inequality areas, is to provide kind of sort of 2 pages on what that data shows for that area, which I think will be really, really helpful for councillors, because it'll give you a really good idea of what that data looks like. I guess what we've tried to steer away from it and looking at it from that asset-based development point is we've selected these areas because they have quite significant issues in their data. What we don't want to do is frame too much of the work we want to do around that deficit. So we pick them because they are holistically some of the worst parts in the city in terms of a multitude of inequalities. What we want to try and do is focus on them really holistically, and sort of, my example would be Heartsease. The CCG noted that there's quite a high prevalence of obesity in Heartsease. But if you go into an area and basically say, hi guys, you're all fat, you're never going to get residents to really buy into what you're going to try and do. What you really need to do is be led by what the residents want to do in relation to healthy lifestyles, and you work your project from the ground up from that. So we do have lots of data, and once those sort of profiles are done, very, very happy for those to be shared as widely as possible. We've shared this data with a lot of other agencies, especially voluntary agencies, to inform grant applications so that they can have a really strong database for where they're trying to achieve funding sources to help. Does that answer your question? I think I rambled.
I do have a supplementary, if that's all right. That does largely answer the sort of original question that I had, and I look forward to seeing those data sheets. I suppose my supplementary question is about how that data is variable, or is sort of, as I understand it from the reference to this document in the original COVID recovery blueprint, there was a sort of commitment to not taking a one-size-fits-all approach. And I found that during lockdown, the less affluent parts of Mancroft Ward, there was actually quite a lot of mutual aid support and neighbours helping each other, and friends helping each other, and family helping each other. It just wasn't as visible. And so I wonder how you're capturing that less visible data, where there's not organised groups, organised mutual aid groups, or organised WhatsApp chats, but there are people helping each other. And maybe this comes into a bit about the communication and how you communicate with groups that are maybe not so formalised or visible to the council in formal settings.
Very much, and I think a lot of the groups we work with are of that nature. They don't want us promoting them as groups. They don't see themselves as groups. They see themselves as a bunch of people on their street who are just doing some good stuff. So we do capture some of the stuff around that in terms of, we would probably call them hyperlocals or kind of informal residents groups. And we're very careful not to try and force formalisation on them, just because that's a language that the council can understand, is we try and promote that anyway. But I think you're absolutely right. It comes back to that question of, how do we get people who are doing that to see that there is value in engaging with us? And how do we make sure there is value in engaging with us? What are we bringing to the table that helps them outside what they're doing for themselves? And if there isn't, how do we just create a culture for those groups where they can thrive, they can get the right information they need, and they don't have to have contact with us if they don't want to, but whatever we're doing is still supportive of them.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring in Adam at this point, please.
Yeah, it's just to on the data point, I would just point Councillor Osborne and other members to the report that went to the Cabinet in March this year, and that had a summary of the work undertaken as the pilot of the reducing inequalities area, and I think exemplifies some of the asset-based approach that Kate's been outlining and how we've worked with residents in that area, and that's very much the template. And that has an infographic in there about some of the sort of data side of things. So I believe that's an appendix to the item on reducing inequalities from March Cabinet this year.
It's also probably worth pointing out now that Adam's reminded me we've done stuff on data, is that one of the really interesting proxy measures through the local area survey is the 2 questions we added, I want to say a year ago, Adam, maybe a bit more, on how much do you feel part of your community and how much do you feel your community pulls together to help one another. It's a really, really good proxy measure for understanding whether or not people feel like they're able to come together and feel like they're able to affect change. So even if they're not formal, there's still a view there.
And again, that's reported on to Cabinet as part of the performance framework regularly.
I'm just going to bring in Councillor Osborne with a supplementary question, and then just so that people know who I've seen so far, we'll then have Councillor Sands and then Councillor Carlo. Thank you.
Actually, Chair, I think actually thinking about it, my supplementary question is actually more of a separate question, so I'll let other people come in first, and then I'll come back to that.
Great.
If that's all right.
Thank you for that. So in which case, Councillor Sands, please.
Thank you, Chair. The report there was very, very heartening by Kate. I found it very, very interesting. And one of the things which she did make clear is that the wards across the city not only vary enormously in character and makeup, we of course know that within wards we have quite wide variation as well. And of course this is where what Kate said further about the redefining and perhaps enhancing the role of councillors. So it's good to see that this review of who councillors are, not as individuals, you know, by name, but you know, by role, is under review and is being looked at, because of course it can only be an advantage to both review and redefine councillor roles, because of course council is not just cabinet. We have 39 councillors in City Hall, all of whom have individual inputs to make, and so bringing councillors closer to their wards, able to sort of bring in concerns and understandings of their residents, can only be a good thing and can only strengthen the council in the long term. So I really welcome Kate's report there.
Thank you. Kate, did you want to say anything in relation to Councillor Sands's comments?
Not particularly, but obviously if there's, so we did these workshops a couple of years ago, maybe about 18 months ago now, and there wasn't a brilliant uptake, but we'd be really, really happy to look at, you know, what it is that members would like to help them in that journey if they need it, and understand how we can best support that in terms of the dissemination of information and that sort of stuff.
Thank you. That's actually a really helpful point to make. Councillor Carlo, please, you're next. Thank you. Denise, you're muted. Sorry, Councillor Carlo, you're still muted.
Sorry about that. Kate, I wonder, in preparing your report, Kate, I wondered if you looked at the Scrutiny Task and Finish report of 2015, and it was a very detailed piece of work. It was called Building Social Inclusion and Capital in Norwich. And it did quite a number of practical exercises. There are focus groups, and it surveyed a very large number of voluntary groups in Norwich. And it made a very large number of recommendations, and which are really relevant to what we're discussing today. But it's very unclear to what degree the recommendations were implemented. I think some of them clearly were, for example, the Lomni work. But one recommendation, for example, ensure City Council policies and service delivery and those of other public bodies in the city build social capital. So it would be very helpful to revisit those recommendations and to see actually what was implemented. So obviously what you say is very encouraging and positive, but I have got some major concerns. I represent a ward where there's a very high degree of community engagement, and obviously it would be very good to see all other areas of the city have the same degree of community engagement. But the problem is actually on the council side that some of the decisions are handed down to us in the ward without any prior consultation at all. And there's a sense of grievance. And that also applies to the ward councillors. We're not consulted, we're told what's going to happen. Obviously, the most famous case at the moment is Hayham Park, where we were told the all-weather courts were going to be built, and the community then offered to take on that community asset, and that was denied to us. And it's got a very long history, which I won't go into. But it seems to me that really the council's got to let go and allow the communities to take on things that they want to do in their community. The council's got to be open and transparent. The council has got to share information. And so what I'm suggesting as a recommendation actually is you're talking about a blueprint, but I would like to see maybe the idea of a council citizen compact with participation, open and transparency at its heart, to start to address the council culture of actually being a top-down council, being a patriarchal council at times, not sharing information. And I looked at the Constitution to see actually what that said, because that's a good starting point for the culture of the council. And it's very, very unimaginative. So the protocol on the public just talks about mechanics. It talks about elections, it talks about petitions, it talks about public questions. There's nothing in there about genuine public engagement. Then I looked at the protocol on member officer working arrangements. And there again, it talks about a lot about party groups. It talks about, in relation to wards, that the councillors will be notified of work proposed in or close to the area they represent. But it says nothing about involving councillors and residents in making decisions which affect their ward. So I'm a bit sceptical about the idea of working up community engagement, actually, unless the council starts to change its own culture internally. And so hence I would recommend a compact. And other members want to speak, and if your experiences are very different, then I'm really pleased about that. But actually, that is my experience as a ward councillor.
Thank you for that, Councillor Carlo. I don't know if there's, obviously that was quite a detailed submission there. I don't know, Kate, whether there's anything that you feel you can sort of comment there. I mean, one of the things that just occurs to me is that, particularly in relation to the items you've just teased out about the council's constitution, whether there is some a possible recommendation to the council's constitution working party to look at whether the language could be changed in the constitution to make it more consultative rather than potentially top down. So that's just throwing that out there. There's a potential there. But Kate, if I can bring you in, if you have any sort of comments on that.
Yeah. I mean, the scrutiny committee that you referenced was slightly before my time. I started in 2016, but without wanting to sound like teacher's pet, it was one of the first things that Bob actually gave me when I started. And if you ever come visit our office, it's actually written up in giant letters behind my desk. Because I do think actually what came out of that in terms of the recommendations is kind of a very much part of how our team have lived and breathed and how we do business as usual in terms of trying to engage. And I don't in any way dispute what you're saying about council culture has to shift as well. And very much what this is focused on. It's not about asking communities to do more without us shifting to how communities want us to be. And I think that is very much the initial name we actually came up with, because I'm very obsessed with how you name things, was talking about citizen power and community power. And I guess what we came to with using the word citizen was we have a lot of people in our city who don't feel part of a community. So we almost didn't want to use the word community and make them feel like it wasn't for them. We wanted it to feel like it was absolutely for everybody. But if you looking through the blueprint, it's very much about how we shift our working practices to make it easier for people to come to us and to really emphasize that need for collaboration.
Thank you for that. Just so in terms of members who I've seen indicate, I've got Councillor Osborne, Councillor Driver, Councillor Graham. Thank you. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chair. I think that Denise's concerns are actually very valid when it comes to the council, the sort of council's culture. I don't think that necessarily invalidates, or it's not a criticism of this report. In my opinion, the way I see this report, and Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, but that it's a blueprint and it's a work in progress, and that this is something that we're aiming. It's a process to change the culture in the council. But my suggestion would be that actually there's a sort of what I didn't see in this report yet is a sort of vision statement for what we want this report to achieve, and that maybe some of those concerns that Denise raised and that Kate, you were sort of addressed early on by talking about not being a top-down council, but about empowering people, that can be sort of encapsulated in a vision statement that can then maybe also feed into the Constitutional Working Party. And I do think that's a good recommendation to recommend to the Constitutional Working Party that we look at council language.
Thank you.
And sorry, one other thing, if I have a slight issue with the word citizen, because I think that we should also be looking at people who are not necessarily citizens of this country, especially people who may be undocumented or not citizens of this country.
It's interesting because I think the term citizen has often been used as feeling more inclusive than merely resident, which perhaps feels a little more stark. But yeah, it's an interesting point. Kate, did you want to say anything in relation to Councillor Osborne's points there?
Yeah, I think what will come out of this first piece of research is that vision statement. And I suppose what I'm loath to do at the moment is impose that vision statement on before we've asked residents what they want that vision to be. It's that funny chicken and egg bit, but when you're doing that kind of co-production bit, I don't want them to feel like we've already made a decision about what the vision is until we've worked with them to understand what they want from us.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got Councillor Driver next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I just want to go into this citizen a bit, Kate, where you were talking earlier about there's people doing things on the street who do not want to get involved with Norwich City Council, but still doing a great job in their area. So I just want to come out what Denise was saying, and she mentioned her ward, Higham Park, and all the criticism and everyone up in arms in Higham Park. Can we just remember that this went through planning committee, and planning committee voted on this bit on Higham Park, so the community were involved. They could have turned up to that. They could have turned up to planning committee, which they did do, and they lost the vote. So it didn't come from top down. Now, what worries me is we should not be going in and just because citizens come out and they open their mouth and shout loudest, we shouldn't make that council policy. There are people who live in this city who are quiet, never open their mouths, but to talk to local councillors or local communities who want things in their area as well. And they're the unheard of people. And it seemed to me that some wards are more vocal than others, and some wards are more acceptable to others. Where I am in Lakenham, represent Lakenham, I mean, you could practically put an atom bomb off and we'll be happy. I mean, as long as we're all nice and safe and stuff like this, I mean, it's just different to some of the other wards in the city. I mean, if something happened in Eton or Nelson and stuff like that, and a new supermarket was going to open up or something similar, you would have hundreds of people complain. But in certain areas of the city, you don't. So I hope, Kate, that you do listen to the majority and minority people who have got things to say. And we've also got a lot of ethnic people in certain areas as well, which they would like to be heard of as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that what I don't want this meeting to become is rehearsing the situation around the Hayham Park tennis courts. So if we can stop the discussion on that now, I think, and reflect back to where we are on the agenda, and in that note, I'll bring in Councillor Graham. Thank you.
Thank you. I really welcome the positivity and the openness of this report. I think, but I do want to flag up a couple of things that haven't been mentioned, perhaps in the interest of positivity, and that's the barriers, some barriers to people getting engaged. In my experience, people want to engage with people who look like them, and where we talked about unheard voices, I think that may cover my points, but I kind of feel that we should spell out that there are barriers that people need to overcome, and want to hammer it home that some of the people who are going to be doing the engagement and who we really want to hear from are people who have lived experience of barriers such as racism and disability. And another thing about, I loved your rationale for talking about citizens rather than communities, because if you're if you live somewhere on a 6-month contract, it's very difficult for a bunch of people in a street to become a community unless they have some stability. And I know we've done some great work in helping people to maintain their tenancies. And I want, I hope that we'll continue that, and that will be part of the engagement strategies to allow people to stay where they are if they want to.
Thank you for that, Councillor Graham. Kate, did you wish to say? You don't need to say anything for each of these. They can just be part of the councillor's submission. But is there anything you particularly wanted to sort of come back on that?
No, nothing in particular.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Well, I've got Councillor Mccartney Gray next, then Councillor Osborne, then Councillor Giles. Then I think we'll see how we're going, but we might need to start teasing out some recommendations at that point. So, Councillor Mccartney Gray next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank Kate for such a fabulous report. My background is obviously involvement, engagement, consultation from an NHS point of view, where you're absolutely tied up in reams and reams of legislation, and you do mention that that about navigating statutory duties on page 43 of the report at point 31. But I really like the way that where you said that you need to be willing for approaches not to work and to learn from failure. And it's not really failure, it's just about learning. So thank you for putting that in, because that's what I always try to get across in my previous role. You also tackled Councillor Carlo's point about the lack of council-wide buy-in at point 25 as one of the risks and considerations, and that this is not going to happen overnight. This is a long-term blueprint and a long-term strategy, and something that we can all be very proud of to be involved in. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Unless Kate wishes to add anything there, I'll bring in Councillor Osborne, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got sort of 2 questions, if I can. So one is just building on that that point that Councillor Carlo and Councillor Mccartney Gray just referred to, is about how how we have those principles without making it a one-size-fits-all approach, and whether we're talking about citizens or communities, different things may work for different people. For me, I find citizen quite a sort of individual term, and I prefer the word community, and maybe different people have a completely different word. And sort of how are we going to square that varied approach with having a comprehensive set of principles that's going to be adopted council-wide. My other question is about accountability on this. So, Kate, you mentioned that in response to your question, my question earlier, that we need to be able to show residents or citizens or communities, whatever you want to call it, what the council can actually do for them. And I'd like to know a bit more about what it is that council can do for them, and also how we are going to ensure that the council does deliver that, because in my experience, one of the biggest turn-offs for people in engaging with the council is that they say, we've reported fly tipping, we've reported human excrement on our stairwells, we've reported the gardens not being maintained, and the council hasn't done anything. And whether that's the community enabling team or whether it's other teams, there's that lack of following through really puts people off engaging with the council. And so I'd want to see something within the community engagement strategy about how we're going to address that, keeping in mind what Laura said about trying and not measuring things by failure. I think that's a really important point as well.
Okay, thank you for that.
If I can just come in, I suppose, on the first point, you're absolutely right. A one-size-fits-all doesn't work. You can have a universal offer that people can kind of come to, but if you're looking at how you engage and truly work with communities, you have to be led by them. I think that will be really reflected in the principles that we put together, is they're not going to be this rigid structure of you must do this, you must do that. It's much more about that sense of reflection, that it's asking those questions. Have you considered the role for local residents in this? How can you justify what you've done in terms of bringing people to the party and ensuring people have been informed and been truly engaged in the process? So I think that's really key to what these principles have to be. And it was why I was going back to the wording. It's why I was really keen for it to be more of a sort of blueprint thought model, as opposed to a really hard and fast set of actions that someone would have to undertake, because every situation will be very different. And we want to empower officers to make the right choice with guidance. And then on your second point, I might defer a little bit to Adam, but I think certainly the accountability sits around the corporate KPIs. We do need to make sure that we're doing this. One of the pieces of learning from looking at the Safer Neighbourhoods type initiative, where we're looking at going into a particular area and doing some really specific work, is simply, are we meeting our basic service standards? Are people getting from us what they expect to get from us? And when we did the piece of work in the Groves, that was a really big piece of learning, was that we went round there and simply looked at the windows and realised our contractors, who we just assumed were doing the work to the right standard, weren't. And that's the very, very basics we have to get right before we're ever going to be able to build on that sense of trust. I don't know, Adam, if you wanted to come in with anything else around that data side.
Yeah, happy to. And I think you've highlighted it is an absolutely key challenge, which is that there could be a dissonance. However aspirational we might be around empowering and working with residents, communities, citizens, if we're not delivering the core services, those basic hygiene factors, then there's a dissonance there, which undermines that sense of how much we're delivering for the people we're here for. But I think in terms of how we measure it, it's a really difficult thing, because a lot of what we're talking about is culture change. So there's an element around how teams and managers are incentivized to exhibit certain behaviors. And that subtle stuff, which is difficult to boil down to a set of metrics. And as Kate's saying, in terms of how that sort of broken window test is often used as a sort of feel of a community. Well, we need similar ways of evaluating the feel of how the council's doing. And in terms of the role of the councillors, that feels to me like something that is one of the relevant things, is that councillors, with that exposure to communities, to residents, the feel that communities have about the service they're receiving and the way it's been delivered is probably one of the key ways of measuring that. Again, you're not going to necessarily boil that down to a corporate performance measure, but just because it can't be made quantitative doesn't mean it doesn't have some value. And a bit like what Kate was saying with the local area survey, which is an incredibly rich data set of people's experience of life in the city, we need to be factoring in that sense of how people feel about the council, which won't necessarily be metrics, but it's certainly a rich data set that we can use to measure how effective this is in terms of that culture change.
Thank you for that. Councillor Osborne, I believe you've got a supplementary.
Thank you. Yes. I mean, I think it's quite telling that you know, there is that acknowledgement that in many cases the council hasn't been delivering on the basic services, and I think I'm pleased to see that that is getting. You know, there's an acknowledgement of that, and through the Safe Neighbourhoods initiative, I've been working quite a lot with Tim Bacon recently, and I think that is improving, and I'm pleased to see that. I could also give you a long list of other places where council hasn't been meeting its basic services. But two sort of points that I want to make on that is, one is that I think the strategy that we're considering today also needs to consider the council's partners, so contractors and other charities and groups that the council's working with, sort of a more explicit mention of that. I know that there is a point on working with district and health partners, but I'd like to see this culture change also brought through in the council's contractors as far as is possible. And the other point about accountability is about, you know, there are cases where trust is broken down with the council, between communities and council, and I wonder whether there's going to be a process for mediation or dispute resolution in those cases.
I suppose just one point to come in. I suppose the wording of the council not delivering basic services is not wording I would necessarily adopt myself. I mean, I think that's, you know, I mean, I think as ever, there are a series of many faceted complex services which intersect in communities. And of course, they're not going to be 100% perfect all the time. But I think the point I was making was rather that the culture around this idea of how we work with the people who receive our services, for want of a better term, is something that we are looking to work on with in the light of everything that Kate's been outlining. And you're right, that does need to then, as it were, trickle down through all of the delivery of the council services, whether that's directly by council staff or contractors. But you know, every large organisation that does lots of things struggles to ensure, you know, whether it be Barclays Bank or Norwich City Council, struggles to get adherence to core values and principles. But as part of the transformation and change within the council, that's an absolutely acknowledged thing, that it has to absolutely include our contractors, because as far as people who receive services are concerned, it is the council. Doesn't matter what badge or what lanyard it is the council. So absolutely the challenge is to make sure that the values that inform this strategy percolate all of the ways in which we deliver services to people in Norwich. And
just to follow up slightly on that, I think, you know, people don't always see us as separate from other statutory agencies. They will hold the authority for failings in social care, for what they perceive to be a lack of policing, any of those things. So the more work we can do with those partners to kind of try and influence them as much as we can to adopt a similar mindset is always going to be beneficial. At the end of the day, if a resident's getting a better service from whoever it might be, whether it's from us or somebody else, that's got to be a good thing. So, you know, we will try and influence partners where possible and build that into the way we work with them.
Can I just, thank you for that. Can I just ask about the dispute resolution things as well, and mediation?
I think that's quite hard, sorry, Chair, I think that's quite hard to comment on at the moment, because I think that Kate's presenting us with a framework here for lots of work to be done. So I think that, you know, we'll have to see how that work pans out. Do you think that's right, Kate, in terms of where we are? Yeah.
And I think, again, it comes back to what those recommendations and things could be. You know, if we've got cases where trust has broken down, how can we understand why it broke down? Was it reasonable? What were the differences on both sides? And would something like mediation fix that? Because we don't probably know yet. If we don't know, and we don't know the prevalence of how often that's happening. So I think, as Nikki said, this is a really iterative process, and I think, you know, we just need to be influenced by what people are telling us to understand what the nature of what we have to do is.
Thank you for those answers. I've got Councillor Giles and then Councillor Carlo, and then we really need to start thinking about some recommendations. So, Councillor Giles.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to thank start by thanking Kate and her team for the fantastic work they've done in what's obviously been a very challenging year, and obviously looks like we're going to have a very challenging winter ahead. The question I wanted to ask was in relation to how we think community food provision, community mutual aid will how it will be over the winter if we do move into further public health restrictions, as other areas of the country have been put into. Just thinking in terms of, obviously earlier in the year we had the furlough scheme, and that did enable some people who otherwise would have been working to participate in that kind of activity. Obviously there is some support, but not on the same scale as that. And I'm wondering if further public health restrictions are imposed, given the year people have had, there'll be a much greater sense of urgency in continuing to work through the pandemic, despite the public health issues. And just wondering about how we think our provision for those that are self-isolating will cope in the circumstances. Sorry, that was really waffly, but
I don't think that's quite within the scope of this particular piece, but it just so happens I am the lead for food for the county in terms of COVID. So if the chair's happy, I can answer that question, although it's not quite part of that.
Yeah, happy for that. Thank you.
So I think, you know, we've been keeping regular contact with all the food groups, with Food Bank and all that sort of stuff. And while you're absolutely right, there was more of a proliferation of neighbourhood-based food banks during the initial stages of COVID, and we've absolutely seen that furlough ending has taken away some of that workforce effectively. I'm really confident that we have quite a robust system in place to, obviously the ideal is someone gets support in their community, but council is there to absolutely provide a safety net for that if that doesn't happen. So as part of my work, sort of part seconded to county, we have a humongous stockpile that we've just pressed the button on with funding from county for some stockpiled food in the event that a no-deal Brexit happens or something of that nature. We're very confident we have that. We also have a very good working partnership with Morrison's across the county, where if someone presents to us in need and they cannot find a community solution, we have the Norfolk Assistance Scheme, who had £1 million from government to look at the basic essentials for people who are struggling with hardship based on what's happened through COVID. And that has barely been scratched the surface of already. There's still a lot of money in that, and they will order food for people in a really flexible way. If, for example, shielding was reintroduced and we get the responsibility for feeding people in terms of what previously had been that national government piece, we have a really robust plan in place for that as well at a county level. And we can draw down from that. If it was a local lockdown, for example, we can draw down from that stockpile and utilise all of those processes, make sure Norwich residents are protected. So it may be that it's not going to be delivered as much on a community basis as it was before, because of exactly as you're talking about the restrictions on people's time if we're not in a full lockdown scenario. I'd definitely like to put your mind at rest that the work that we've been doing through the Community Resilience and Recovery Cell as part of the NRF is really robust. And I don't just say that because I led it. It really, you know, we've really belt and braced it and made sure that we feel very comfortable that that's in hand.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Councillor Carlo, please.
I think you're on mute again, Denise.
Is that okay? Yes. Okay. Yes, I wanted to underline the point about the importance of delivering efficient public services, and people's experience of the council is via delivery of public services. In Nelson Ward, West Pottergate, a large area of social housing has come into the ward, and it's been an eye-opening experience about how the people there relate to the council and how services, even basic services, are delivered to them in terms of keeping the bin areas clean and so on and so forth. And with the residents group there, ward councillors have gone to the council about the idea of audits of the areas and doing regular walks to audit very basic things like the cleanliness of stairwells and so on and so forth. And I'm glad to say that the council is looking at setting up some sort of voluntary system, getting residents to volunteer to take on the audits, to go around in little teams and to assess, and that would really help community engagement and develop good relations with the council. But as a ward councillor, I know I'm diverting here a bit, but it would be very helpful to understand much more some of the processes which go on inside the council, and to understand, for example, why in relation to the contractor it took 2 years to replace a small window in a landing, or 3 years to replace a door in someone's flat, or 4 years why a resident got the same response regarding ASB and drugs from a near neighbour. It's very, very frustrating at times. And it's very inefficient use of our time as councillors, and very frustrating for residents. So from a point of view of engagement, and I know I'm broadening out the discussion, it would be good to have a much better understanding of of internal council processes and how things are dealt with. And I think the task group today, which has been deferred, the fly tipping one, for example, it would be good to start to sort of undo the black box of decision making and get to see how things actually operate and where improvements can maybe be made.
I think there's a possible recommendation there. If people are happy, I'm now going to move to some potential recommendations. Picking up on, and Councillor Osborne, I've noted that you wish to speak. So picking up on discussion we had earlier on, here's my sort of starter for 10 on recommendations, and that is ask Cabinet to commission a piece of work to refresh the Constitution so that it more accurately reflects the collaborative nature of the Council. And that picks up Councillor Carlo's point about some of the language used in it that gives the feeling that councillors are done unto in their wards rather than being a part of the process. Perhaps picking up on Councillor Carlo's most recent point, I wonder whether there is an opportunity to have a member briefing on council processes in relation to contractors and how that knocks on to some of the experiences that sort of are lived experiences in the communities, and whether that would be practical. Presumably that sort of briefing could be done even in a full lockdown, because we could do that virtually. Can I bring in at this point then Councillor Osborne?
Thank you, Chair. Just on that last point and the point that Councillor Carlo made, I think a briefing for councillors would be useful, but I think the real issue is actually making clear to residents who points of contacts are, and also making sure that as I understand it, this will be reviewed, that making sure that actually contact from residents is followed up on, and because we come up against a lot of instances where people can't contact the community safety team or the community enabling team or the council, the customer contact center, and things get bounced around between different things, and in the end nothing ever happens. And so it's I think there's got to be maybe a look at whether it's helpful for councillors to have for residents to have a single point of contact, like we used to have housing officers or sort of a caretaker in estates who can be a person who can that they can directly speak to about issues that come up on estates. Just a couple of other recommendations. One is about the vision statement, which I mentioned earlier, which I think Kate's already taken on board. The other is about actually publishing a list or a map of community groups, sort of more formal ones, that is, I suppose, so that people can see where they are and join them. I'll just rattle through these. The other is about setting up a community centres forum, which was actually recommended in 2013. I think that scrutiny work that Councillor Sands referred to earlier, which was the idea of that is that the community centres can come together and apply for grants or insurance or things like that would actually, it's easier for them to do in bulk, or they can support each other in doing that. On the issue of financing, I would also suggest that it may be that the council can have a grants officer. Something that other councils do is to employ a grants officer whose job is to basically search out for grants that the council can apply for. And the idea is that will bring in more money than the cost of the officer, but that could potentially also offer support to community groups in applying for funding, because that can be a really tricky process. And then I'd also suggest that there's more wording in the strategy document on working with partners, sort of making that more explicit, and the point about accountability that I raised earlier, and ensuring that services are delivered on.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. What I hope is that someone is capturing those suggestions you have there. I'm getting a thumbs up, because what will happen is they'll go on a screen, and then we can then look at what those recommendations might actually look like.
May I just come back on a couple of those points just
Sure.
very briefly? In terms of the list of community groups, that is Lumi. In terms of our website, we publicly encourage all resident groups who want to be publicly out there to list themselves as an organisation and list all their activities. And we put a lot of effort into supporting groups to do that. The Community Centre Forum, we did try and work with community centres, but they didn't want that, unfortunately. What we have done though is we took the learning from our food network, which has been exceptionally successful, bringing together groups who've got a similar interest, and we've developed that into what we call a venues network, which is very much what you just talked about, which is the idea of coming together, supporting each other, peer learning, any opportunities for kind of combined stuff. But we widened it out outside the centres, because when we were doing those events with the centres and our NCC owned centres alone, we got next to no take up from them at all.
Thank you. Thanks for that. There was another, just picking up things that sort of happened during the discussion. Another possible recommendation was around the idea of a council citizen compact that came up in the discussion. So we'll give that some consideration as well. Does anyone else? I hadn't seen anyone else indicate. So does anyone else wish to? Councillor Thomas.
You're on mute, Viv.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Yeah, we've heard about criticisms. I mean, in every area of life, there are always room for improvements, but I feel that the council is on task, aware of what's needed, and we're in very difficult, trying times. We all know budgets are stretched, and I feel that the council is doing its best to deliver the services and will continue to do so, and has in fact been hard at work delivering extra support and services to the people of this city. I feel the work that's being done is very positive, and it will give people the vehicle to engage by voice, or actually engage actively if they so wish and are able to do so.
Thanks very much for that. Any other members who have anything? Councillor Osborne.
Yes, I mean, I do agree with what Councillor Thomas just said about the asset-based approach is important, and stressing the positive things. But the other recommendation I was going to say is obviously ongoing, looking at whether how mediation, whether mediation's an appropriate solution for breakdown in trust between the council and some communities. Obviously bearing in mind what Nikki said earlier, about that it's not necessarily the right time to do that now, but bearing that in mind and looking at whether that's an appropriate solution.
Thank you. Councillor Driver.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just one thing I want to know. I mean, I've been a councillor for a long time now, I'm afraid. But there is one thing that always worried me is I always thought the councillors supposed to be in charge of city councillors, a city council, not the officers. They should do the recommendation and we ask them to do or try to. And what really gets me is when a resident come after me and I go after an officer and say, oh, we want this for the resident or that for the resident, and the answer come back no, I don't mind telling the resident no, but I want to know the rationale with that no is and why we can't turn that into a yes for future time. Now, if the councillors are there and that's their recommendation that we should be trying doing this for residents who in their wards or whoever, and the council officers are telling us no, but the councillors are saying, well, we think this is a good idea. Now, I don't mind going back to the residents to say no the first time, but surely there should be something that the officers should be looking into to say, well, perhaps Councillor Driver and the resident was right. Why did we say no this time? Can we say yes next time? And like this, so I just want to know if we can put something in like that, if possible. Somewhere that the officers would actually look into why they told us no and try and make it a yes next time.
Thank you. So possibly summing that up as a discussions with councillors would always include a rationale from officers as to why a particular decision is being taken. Is that the right sense on that, Councillor Driver?
Yeah, up to a point, but there are decisions what you keep coming back to, and it's no, 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 no. And being elected councillors, I think the officers should be telling us yes, yes, yes. I mean, it is the councillors who are in charge of City Hall, not the officers. We have to get elected every 4 years. It's the public telling us what the council should be doing. I know the officers do lots of research and stuff like this and make a hell of a lot of really excellent recommendations. But I think they should be listening to local people and councillors on the doorstep.
Thank you for that. Councillor Somesi.
Thank you, Chair. I sort of understand a bit where people are coming from in some of these contributions today about, you know, sometimes things are coming up and we don't quite know the rationale and so forth. Very often I do know the rationale. You know, most of the time, if I've got a query that I put into the Civica box, I get a good answer, a good response about that. So I think it's important to remember that as well. And sometimes the officer's response is reasonable and the resident doesn't necessarily want to know that they can't have X, Y, or do X, Y, and Z. But unfortunately, sometimes that's part of our role, is to kind of just explain, really sorry, but you know, you can't have a parking bay outside your front door, even though X, Y, and Z is reasons that you're asking me for this, or something like that. Do you know what I mean? So I think we need to be careful about, you know, we've talked a lot today about, you know, the strain on councillors during this COVID period. Never mind the COVID period, we've had 10 years of you know, being starved of funds generally. We've had all kinds of other things as well besides COVID, which was like the final, you know, the whammy, if you like. So I'm not saying everything is perfect, and I'm not saying that sometimes I don't go back and ask for a bit more information, but I think on the whole I do get good rationale, and I think, you know, I can sometimes go back, nearly always go back and say, these are the reasons that I've been given. And you know, yes, I'm the councillor, and I'm the conduit between the residents and the officers, but the officers have things like legal boundaries and requirements they have to defer to as well, or refer to, I should say. So I just wanted to put a bit of balance on that, if you didn't mind, Chair. Thank you.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you for that. Are we at a position where we have something on a screen that we could share with members to see where our current thinking is at? Getting nods.
Everyone see that?
Yep. I've got to see if I can see everyone else if they want to indicate. So we'll take the first, this page first. Make life easier for Lucy, so you don't have to keep scrolling between the two. So does anyone have any comment they wish to make on any of the recommendations that you've got on the screen in front of you? Councillor Graham, please.
Thank you. I think number 3 was about ward councillors and residents having a better understanding of council processes, not just councillors.
But I mean, presumably for it to be a member briefing, though, it would have to be councillors only.
As an event, maybe, but as a page of information,
yeah,
not necessarily.
Okay, yeah, fair point. Fair point. I've got a sea of hands, and I didn't see who came in first. So let's have some hands up again, please. Councillor Sands and then Councillor Osborne, please.
Thank you, Chair. Item 1, to form a council stroke citizen compact with participation and transparency at its heart to challenge council culture. I disagree with that entirely. It leaves out the role of the councillor there. I believe it should have something like to form a councillor citizen compact with participation and transparency at its heart. And I'm not sure that challenge council culture is even the right term. So I sort of disagree with point number 1 entirely. I don't think that's very well worded. I don't think it's at all helpful. It simply puts residents across the city in conflict with the council and eliminates councillors from the whole process. In other words, we may as well do away with councillors and have residents deal direct with city council. It's just wrong.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I disagree with Councillor Sands' assessment. I think, you know, well, I think that it is worth having councillor in there, but I think that it's worth what we need to look at is how does the council as a body interact with residents, and how does the council ensure that it's not imposing solutions onto residents and having that sort of written out and clear. And yes, I don't think it necessarily needs to be to challenge council culture, but to ensure that the council is not imposing on residents, but is actually working working with them. And as I said before, that I think that this may be something that can come out of that vision statement that that I think Kate is working towards, based on what residents say they want. Because in the end, we want this to be reflecting what residents want.
Thank you for that. I'm going to bring Councillor Samesi in, who has a comment on number 1, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I too wonder about the word challenge. I'm thinking of words like shape council culture and influence council culture, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Improve interactions.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I saw Councillor Carlo indicate as well, and then possibly Councillor Graham again.
Yes, to comment on point 1 as well. Yes, I'm thinking in terms of the action is to draft a compact rather than to form a compact. And I suppose really it does relate to, in a sense, back to a mission statement that Kate is talking, and Kate and Jamie have been talking about. Yes, it looks fine as it is. The council includes councillors, because the council is the body, and the councillors are elected to the council. So, but including councillor there is fine. Yeah, so that's fine as it looks now.
Thank you. Councillor Graham, did I see you indicating?
Thank you. My point's been made, but I did have another one to add, which doesn't relate to this page. Is now a good time?
Well, just see if there's anything else on this page. Are people happy following the discussions with this page? Councillor Sands.
Point 4, making it clear to residents who points of contact are within the council. Now, I've always assumed that as a councillor, I am a point of contact for residents. They have the option, of course, of going online to register various complaints. And then, of course, if that doesn't work, then they come to me and to other ward councillors as their point of contact. And so making it clear to residents who points of contact are, that, I mean, again, that seems to eliminate councillors from the equation. I would have suggested perhaps making it clear that points of contact are their elected members or their elected councillors, or wording along those lines would make far more sense than how it is at the moment.
I suppose my only point on that one is that obviously, our contact details are included annually in the Citizen and are also there on the council website. So I would suggest that probably there is already a reasonably good access to contact for councillors and also for the council. But Councillor Osborne, please.
Thank you. I think, first of all, I think that making it clear to residents who points of contact are within the council to ensure that issues are followed through. I think those are two separate things. That one is about making clear that residents know who to contact, and the other is about making sure that that contact is actually followed through, which may be part of that sort of embedding in council culture that Kate was talking about. On Councillor Sands's point, I think that residents should know who to contact at the council and not just councillors, because I think I get daily multiple contact from people who have tried contacting the council and haven't got anywhere, and it's not, glad as I am to try and help, that's not, the council should be clear for residents who need to report something that who they contact at the council, rather than having to go through councillors who are not full-time, not paid to do this.
So sorry to sort of bob in, but is that where people have already contacted? I mean, I don't want to go into great detail about it, and perhaps we can talk again another time. But if you look, most people come through either the website, the customer centre, and we do sort of regular follow-up calls to people, and we do sort of regular consultation with people to see how satisfied they are with what we've done for them. Did we get it right first time? And those figures at the moment are around 80% satisfaction with people who've had an interaction with us. So I suppose it's just making sure that when we say one point of contact, we have got one point of contact, that is the customer centre. If what we're saying is making sure that works effectively if it's passed to someone else, then I think probably what we need to do is share some data with members, rather than, because I think you may be sort of, we may not have made it so obvious. I think some of you had, when you first started, some time in the customer centre with the team. Obviously we can't do that at the moment because of COVID, but I think that's a really useful thing to do, so you can sit and listen to the team when they hear things. So I'm not quite sure what that's trying to mend. Is it trying to say there should be really clearly, we should say what our one point of contact is and hope to resolve issues first time?
I suppose what I'm recommending is that we look at what the most effective thing is going to be for residents, because I think a lot of people actually don't contact the council because they don't know who they want to contact. And so whether having a single point of contact or a named person for that area might help. So I suppose looking at,
different ways. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I might come in a little bit on that point as well, and this is very much from personal experience, being part of a hyperlocal group myself, the joy of really doubling down and supporting local residents to understand this information is they become our signposts in the community, and they actually give, as long as they've got access to good quality information, they do it for themselves. I see it on a weekly basis where the group that I'm part of, someone will say, do I need to phone the council about my parking permit? And someone will go, no, it's all online. And, investing in that absolutely helps in terms of that contact and really good quality information.
Thank you. Councillor Driver, please.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say something similar to what Kate has just said. Councillors are there to give information to their constituencies in their area or all over the city. I mean, people come after me wherever I go. I mean, if I'm shopping up the pub, walking along the street, or if they phone me up, most days I get an inquiry about where to go for the city, and people saying about there's dog poo about everywhere. Well, you tell them to report it. If they can report it on how to do this, or if there's a mattress put somewhere, they do this. If it's not done by the council, then it's up to the council to follow that up, I believe. But if you have one point of contact in the city hall, would be an officer would sit there and wait for a complaint to come in and then sort that one out himself. I mean, that's what customer contact is. You go there and then they place it in the right department who's going to look at it. Now, if the right department is not doing it properly, then they can come back to the city councillor who can take it a bit further and hope they can resolve it. But there are points on there where people can go into Norwich City website and put what their inquiry is, and it will be looked at. So I believe on there you should have something in about first point of contact is one of your councillors if you want, or the councillor website. Go on to the councillor website, that explain where to go from there. So I believe you should put in there something about councillors.
I suppose there is the risk with some of these that they end up being you're almost writing an entire report in terms of recommendations if we want to encapsulate everything that's being
one word
said.
councillors would help.
Are we happy? Well, let me bring in Councillor Sarmezi while Lucy's making some amendments there. Councillor Sarmezi, did you have a point you wanted to raise?
Sorry, I was struggling to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Lovely. great, this idea of helping residents, citizens, call them what you will, you know, be able to navigate systems. One of the things I think that I do as a councillor is to help to facilitate people that have got difficulties, learning difficulties or mental health difficulties or whatever it might be, for whatever reason. These aren't people that don't have a computer, you know, people that don't know how to use a computer, all the rest of it. So I'm not saying necessarily for this document, because I mean it is becoming quite a large thing anyway. But I just want to flag that up. I'm sure it wouldn't go you know, it wouldn't go missed out. But just remember those people, please.
Thank you for that point. I'm proposing now that Lucy scrolls down and we see the next page. I think we've exhausted.
Sorry, James, I was just trying to see what that ended up as, that resolution number 4, was it? Can I come back on that?
Yes, briefly, please, because I'm very conscious of time, because I've no doubt there will be a significant number of recommendations on the LEP as well.
Yes, I think that you know, part of the report that we had from Kate did include a review of council communications, and I suppose what I'm saying is that, you know, we need to actually talk to residents and find out what's going to be most effective for them in terms of contacting the council, whether that's the council itself or councillors, you know, trying to work out what is it that stops people contacting the council, whether that's the issues that Jane just mentioned, which are obviously significant, or whether it's, you know, other issues. And so it's a review of what prevents people contacting the council and how can that be more effective. And I'll stop there.
Okay, so we're effectively looking at items 8 to 11. I believe Councillor Driver wishes to come in. I believe the grants officer was a budget amendment in a previous year.
That's what I was going to come in on, James. I believe the grant officer was actually Bob Cronk. I don't know, Kate could tell us about that. That's who I had to apply for money for.
There's lots of different things. I think Jamie was suggesting there was someone who got grants and attracted grants into the council, which we do through a number of officers, and people will know that at the moment we're applying for a £25 million grant through the Towns deal. So it goes from things like that through to other stuff. But Kate, if you're still there, do you want to talk about, you know, how we use Grant Finder with voluntary organisations and things, don't we? And also your team help community groups to raise grants?
Yeah, my team do, and we actually started pre-COVID doing regular funders forum events. So we would literally invite the funder to talk about the type of thing that was appropriate to them. And then the groups could actually have a one-to-one session with them. And that actually did include also the council as a grant giving officer, which I think is what you're referring to, Councillor Driver, in terms of where we've got our money, we're making sure we communicate it properly, that what we're looking for when we spend our money. There is a grant finding team at county as well, who we work quite closely with in terms of looking at opportunities to collaborate on big things like ESF projects. Having done an ESF project, I don't recommend them at all. They're horrific in terms of admin, but it's great to know someone's there. Likewise, my team will help with smaller things like, you know, a big lottery bid or something of that nature. There is actually a recently developed group of us. We're kind of calling the Norwich and Broadland Community Development Network, which stemmed out of some work around social prescribing. And one of the functions as a group of professionals that we effectively want to offer to community groups is like a free consultancy on grant applications. Because what we see a lot is of really bad grant applications. And we want to maximise the money coming into the city, whether it's to the city council or to any voluntary group. So part of the manifesto we're just working up, and it is a really new group, is about how we offer that, both to funders to say, let us talk to you about how your money is best spent in the city, and then also to groups to say, if that's your project idea, that's great, but did you know it duplicates this, or it could be stronger if you did that, let us give you some data. So we've got, while it's not a grant officer, I think we do have quite a lot of support for groups wanting to write grants.
Chair, can I just come in as well briefly? Just on the having a role of an officer whose job it is to try and get grants into the council. Other councils do that. I think one of the issues that happens is that it's then becomes it can become something where the point of getting money in is to get money in, not because of what you're trying to achieve. So rather than being led by a strategic approach to what you want to achieve and then resourcing it, and sometimes that's about seeking grants to do it, it becomes an objective in itself to raise money. And the risk therefore is that you end up pulling the organisation every which way because you get money in to do things and then you have to do them and they're not necessarily the right things. So it's not necessarily the wrong thing to have someone whose job it is to try and attract resource to achieve things, but it should be starting with what you're trying to achieve, not with the resource.
Thank you for that. I think I've got Councillor Mccartney-Gray next, and then Councillor Sands.
Okay, thank you. I think based on what we've just heard, I think that recommendation 8 actually can come out. It's covered in a number of different areas, and I think it's covered in a way that fits around a number of organisations, and it fits around probably the way that they would access information.
Okay, I think that makes good sense. Councillor Sands, please.
Yep, I agree with Councillor Mccartney-Gray on the comments of Adam there. 8 makes no sense at all. We've had this discussion in quite lengthy debate in full council on more than one occasion. And as Adam says, you run the risk of the grants officer attracting grants for a specific purpose to do things, and grants being given to City Council to do things that don't necessarily fall in with our priorities or needs. In other words, you get grants for a task that's not particularly a task that the council wants to do, but the money's locked into that. So yeah, I agree, take out 8 entirely.
Thank you, Councillor Sands. Councillor Samezi, did you want to come in and make a comment on 9, I think, please?
Yeah, I just wonder, again, this idea of building trust with residents, I think it possibly implies there is no trust with residents. I wondered, should it be build and maintain trust with residents?
Yep, lots of thumbs up to that, so thank you. Any other councillors have any comments they wish to make on the 3 that are still in play on this page? Councillor Sands.
With the amendment that Councillor Samezi has made to 9, that has implications to number 10, because again, it talks about a breakdown in trust between the council and communities. And again, I don't think that wording is entirely correct. I just have to go open the front door because Sue's just arrived home from work. I'll be back in one moment, but I've said what I want to say.
Can I come in on that, Chair? I don't think that it does invalidate recommendation 10, but to make it clearer, maybe it can work in cases where there is, work as a solution in cases where there is a breakdown in trust between the council and communities. And remember that this is just looking at whether it would be appropriate or not.
I mean, ultimately, and on that point, it's worthwhile reminding members of the committee that these are recommendations that we make to Cabinet, and it's up for Cabinet to consider whether or not they form the basis of council policy moving forward. So there is a sort of, just to a certain extent, don't get hung up too much on the wording now, because even if they get to Cabinet, Cabinet may actually say, well, we don't support that notion anyway. Does anyone else have any comments they wish to make? Councillor Sameti.
Sorry, Chair, briefly, I did put it in the chats. Discussions with councillors should always include rationale on why a project can stroke not be taken forward. I think there's a lot of learning, soft learning, when it's explained to me why something can happen, as well as when it cannot happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Does anyone else have any comments they wish to make? Or are we happy that these recommendations can go forward?
I still disagree with number 10. It talked about a breakdown in trust, as if it's a total breakdown, and that's rarely the situation.
I think, given that there's broad agreement in the sentiments for the recommendation, can you come up with a different set of words that encapsulates breakdown in trust, but in perhaps a more neutral way?
We're not talking about breakdown in trust between the council and communities. That sounds like, you know, us and them. I would simply say something like looking at how mediation can work as a solution in cases where a community problem has been identified, something along those lines. Because I don't think it's a breakdown in trust.
Joe, can I come in on that?
Yeah, please do.
I think the point is that this is, you can't have mediation as a solution for where there's a community problem has been identified, because there's lots of community problems where, you know, that's not the point of mediation. The point of mediation is to repair breakdowns in trust. And this is not saying that there's always going to be a breakdown in trust everywhere in the city. It's in case there is a breakdown in trust, and you know, I know of places where there is a breakdown in trust. So whether that's between the community and the council. And so I think this is, you know, as Councillor Wright said earlier, this is a recommendation to Cabinet. It's something to bear in mind and look at going forward, and it's a sort of fallback. You know, no one wants there to be a breakdown in trust, but if there is, how do we resolve it?
Councillor Driver.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Sands here. I believe that we should take this out. It does look like there's a confrontation between us and the citizens and our residents. So I believe that we should take a vote on this and then move on to the LEP straight away.
Well, I'll come to you on the matter of the LEP in a minute, but I'll just bring Councillor Graham in, who's previously indicated, and then we'll look at having a vote on removing that item. Councillor Graham.
I was wanting to suggest a kind of no blame form of words. So maybe looking at how mediation can work as a solution where relationships go wrong, or just where things go wrong.
Where relationships go wrong.
And I was also hoping to add a point about recognising and overcoming barriers to participation, which is alluded to in the report about hearing unheard voices. But I wanted it to be, I was hoping we might spell that out a bit more specifically for people facing those barriers. Thank you.
Thank you. So the item 10 is, I suppose, quite benign now. How are people disposed towards it? Looking at how mediation can work as a solution in cases where relationships go wrong.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Well, that sounds more like marriage guidance.
Don't care.
I think I'd sooner see it eliminated altogether if that's the case.
I mean, from a personal perspective, I mean, I thought the mediation point was important. I think as it's now written, it says absolutely nothing, and I'd rather have a vote on removing it entirely, given that we can't actually have a form of words that makes it say what it actually needs to say. So let's just have a quick show of hands. All those in favour of striking item 10 entirely? Any against? Okay, well that's carried. That item will be removed. If we can, Lucy, get the screen sharing back on again. And 10, how are people feeling around 10? Councillor Carlo.
I'm a bit surprised that Keith doesn't get isn't given a reason by councillors, officers, why something can't be done. But I wondered if it could maybe form part of the looking at the constitution. It could be written into there on the member officer working relation. What's it called? Member officer working arrangements.
So effectively include that in our recommendation number.
Yes, it could be included as an example. For example, my example would be for residents and members to always be informed or consulted about issues in their ward, and not to have decisions handed down to them without any consultation. But that was my purpose in promoting number 2.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Giles.
Thank you, Chair. I think given we've now been on for nearly 3 hours, including the pre-meeting, I think we should draw item 7 to a conclusion and accept the recommendations as they stand.
Well,
I'm also going to propose that recommendations to Cabinet regarding the letter done via email. I think this is regrettable, but I think that's going to have to be necessary. I know at least a few of us have residents' meetings over Zoom ourselves at 7 o'clock, and we wouldn't want to miss them in the circumstances.
You're slightly ahead of some discussions that I've already.
Well, I'm making that as a proposal. So if someone seconds that, can we take?
Well, I'll second that because I would have been proposing that myself. What I was going to suggest is that the LEP discussions happen by email, but are brought to the next meeting of this committee for ratification.
That's fine with me. I'll second that.
Yeah.
Are members happy that we move forward on that basis? Yeah, general nods of agreement. Okay, yep, we're agreed to proceed on that basis.
Yep.
Okay, in which case, thank you very much, and we'll reconvene in November.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.